Welcome to Dawn of the New Earth. My name is Morgue. I'm an ex-Christian revealing hidden knowledge to create a new consciousness in a new world. Today, we are talking about destroying the old self, burning it all down to be able to create the new. Specifically, we are talking about the first step in inner alchemy known as calcination. And it's about burning away all the illusions and falsities that hold you back from becoming the true you. It's a process of destruction before creation can occur. In order to transform, you have to destroy what's already there so that you have room to create, so that things aren't chaining you down or holding you back. And we're going to be talking something about the concept of destroying the ego. You probably hear about destroying the ego a lot in terms of spirituality and mysticism, but there's actually a really big problem with this. And we're going to be explaining why it's actually very dangerous to try and destroy your ego, and that the ego is actually a powerful tool that will aid us in our transformation if understood correctly. So we're going to get started right away. Thank you all for joining me here today. As always, if you enjoy my work, become a member. It helps out a lot. Hit the join button right below this video to become a member. Also, you'll get access to all our members only videos, depending what tier you select, and any tier, any member will get access to my Alchemy PDF downloads. I create PDF downloads for every video I do on Alchemy. I think that there are 5 out right now. They are very helpful, and you will have access to that, and it helps out the channel. Also, remember to check out my book, Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind. That is the first book in my series. Check it out. And you'll find the link to that in the description of this video. And if you're really interested, by the way, in inner transformation, I recommend these 2 books, Neogenesis and Psychogenesis. This is the first book and the last book, but they go together very, very well. And if you're interested in the topics we're discussing today, they will be very helpful. You'll also, in the description, find a link to my Spotify channel. Please follow me there. And you'll also find a link to a shop where you can find certain occult items. People have been asking me, like, where do I get my coins and certain things? There's a shop there that you can find some of the coins, not all of them, but some of the items that I use, you can find there. Okay. All right. All right, my friends. So we are talking about alchemy. We are talking about the first step. So the alchemical process is a 7-step process. I've given an overview before, but now we are going to dive into the details, and we are starting with calcination. So what is calcination in alchemy? Calcination is the process of burning or heating a substance to reduce it to ash or its most basic components. So calcination is a very fiery process. Now, remember, if you are new to this, what alchemy is, it's about transforming the soul, not metal into gold. Metal into gold is a metaphor. This is an advanced form of inner transformation. And the reason why we use the symbols of alchemy is because our unconscious mind doesn't communicate in language as we understand it. It communicates in symbolism. That's why when you go to sleep and dream and you have dreams, your dreams have deep meaning, but they're hidden in symbolism. You have to decipher what they're trying to say. So likewise, when we go through this process of self-transformation, we use the images and symbols of alchemy because they resonate with our unconscious. And we're getting the conscious and unconscious working together in harmony. That's critical to understand when it comes to why we're doing this, because some people might think, well, why don't I just take a psychology course? Or why don't, sure, that would be very, very helpful. But this is about getting the conscious aspect of yourself and unconscious aspect. The conscious aspect is understanding things in a very analytical way. Like, oh, okay, I know I have to do this, then this, then this, then this, and these are the steps. The unconscious is about filling your mind with archetypal imagery so it resonates with your, and it starts to help you and aid you in the background. Your unconscious is sort of like the programming code that runs in the background that directs your life. And so when you have your consciousness and unconscious working together, it's that much more powerful. So that's why we're doing it. That's why we talk about this symbolism. It's about creating a symbolic language to connect with your unconscious mind. And we've talked about the elements. We've talked about the metals in the past. So we have sort of built this symbolic language, and watch my whole playlist if you haven't seen those videos, or check out my PDF notes if you haven't. So we've been building this language. And so now we're going to actually apply this language to begin to understand the different steps of inner alchemy. And today we start with step one, which is calcination. Okay. So calcination is related to the planet Saturn, the metal lead, and the element of fire. These are the associations that go with the first alchemical process of calcination. These are the archetypal symbols that we work with to understand this process: Saturn, lead, and fire. And we'll be explaining exactly why. Lead is sort of the material that we're working with. Saturn gives us a better understanding of what it stands for and what it represents. And fire is the element that is going to drive this particular step. And fire is, of course, remember, symbolizes transformation and change. And why don't we actually, since we're talking about fire, we'll actually have a candle going along with this as well. So today in the process, you can't really see that very well, can you? There. That's a little better. Not the best, but a little better. Okay. So keep this in mind. We're working with Saturn, lead, and fire. Fire is the element that is driving the change. Lead is what we're working with. Saturn gives us more insight into what all this means. So let's talk about that for a little bit now here. So what is Saturn? What does it have to do with this process? Because remember, this is the first process that we're dealing with. And so Saturn, in terms of like astrological meanings and mythology, is seen as a very rigid taskmaster. In fact, Saturn is often associated with Satan or the devil, and that will actually come into play later, and I'll explain the connection there. But suffice to say that Saturn represents structure, limitation, and rules, okay? It represents the frameworks that we all live within. And so remember, the first step in calcination is about destroying all the parts of you that aren't the true you. Everything that has been instilled in you by society, your friends, religion, parents, culture. You aren't really you. You have been shaped and molded into this structure, into this confining, limited structure that you are now working within. And that's what Saturn represents. Saturn represents all those structures and impositions and limitations and rules that have been applied to you by external forces, by society, by culture, etc. Okay? Possibly even personal belief systems, etc. So Saturn represents the frameworks that we all live within, those rules, boundaries, structures. Now, structure is not necessarily bad in of itself. It provides stability and keeps things in order, but it also can become a prison. It locks us into patterns that limit our own growth, and it prevents us from becoming who we really are. So it's not that we don't want structure or pattern. We do. Saturn isn't inherently bad. It's structure and pattern. What's bad is when a limiting structure has been imposed upon you by others. The process of calcination is about breaking down that structure so that then you will be free later to create your own structure, a more powerful structure. Think of it like an operating system on a computer or a phone. If you have an operating system from 10 years ago, it won't be able to play the latest games. But if you get rid of that operating system and install a new operating system, it'll be much more powerful. So this is like creating your own. You want to get rid of the old operating system so you can create your new operating system. So you have to uninstall the old or destroy the old before you can create. Now, Saturn's energy is very resistant to change. It's very stubborn. It likes clinging to old habits, cycles, and control mechanisms. And we often do that because it feels safe. It feels safe to do this. We get very comfortable in the same routine. We get, and this is why a lot of people are drawn to religion as well, because religion imposes rules upon you. You don't need to think for yourself. You just need to see what the rules say, what the Bible says, what your pastor says. It also leads you freedom from accountability because you're just doing what God says. You're doing God's will. And so you have the freedom from freedom. You actually don't have freedom because you're limited. And so a lot of people think that they like freedom, but they don't. People actually don't want freedom because with freedom can come stress and anxiety because now you're accountable for your own actions. You don't have someone telling you what to do or some system telling you what to do. So It's about getting rid of those structures and faulty belief systems. And this has a lot to do with the ego, which we're going to be discussing here. But Saturn, the metal of Saturn is lead. Now, lead is really dense. It's, I mean, it's not like you can tell on here, but it's very heavy. It's very dense, and it doesn't want to change. Like Saturn, lead is the weight of conditioning, the weight of society's expectations, the weight of religious impositions, the weight of, how you should be, how you shouldn't be, the things we even tell about maybe even the fears or beliefs that we have about ourselves. Now, this becomes like this lead. This lead becomes like a cage, and it keeps us trapped in rigidity. So the problem is that a lot of people like their cage. Why? Well, a cage can be protective. You can be protected by having a cage. But guess what? You're not going to be able to do very much growth when you are stuck in a cage. So what do we do about this? We apply the process of calcination. The process of calcination is facilitated by the element of fire. Fire represents change. Fire represents transformation. We have to burn through all the old structures. Fire is the ultimate catalyst. It's transformation. It consumes. It reduces all those false structures, everything that's rigid and confining, to ash. And it's in the destruction that we'll finally be able to be free to create. Because when you step into the fire, you're just burning up all the things that hold you back and creating space for something new and authentic to actually be put in its stead and created instead. So basically, this is all about calcination is the first step in inner alchemy, and it's about identifying all our confining structures, our confining identities that perhaps feel safe and comfortable, but are holding us back. And the element of fire is what enables us to confront that head on. Okay? So let's talk about what this means. This has to do with the ego. Now, in a lot of spiritual systems and new age systems, and even alchemical systems, if you look up the step of calcination, it'll often say, oh, it's about destroying your ego. The first step is about destroying your ego, destroying your ego, destroying your ego. Now, that's actually not what you want to do. So remember, I teach the steps of inner alchemy in terms of the Neogenian system of inner star actualization, which is a very powerful framework of psychogenesis for transforming the mind. I mentioned that book in the beginning of the video. And what we need to understand is, in our process of calcination, it's not about destroying the ego. A lot of people talk about killing the ego, destroying the ego. You don't want to do that. It's about destroying the identification with the ego. And that is very different from actually destroying the ego. And this is a huge mistake that a lot of people make. And so this process of calcination will be a large in part having to do with burning away the identification with the ego, not burning and destroying the ego itself, but the identification. And so what's the difference? Well, we have to understand, first of all, that the ego is a very powerful tool that will actually aid in our process of alchemy and transformation, but it will get in the way if we identify with it. So an example is a fork. A fork is a tool. If you want to eat spaghetti, you don't want to destroy your fork. Your fork is a powerful tool for eating spaghetti. If you destroy your fork, you're going to have a very messy time. It's not going to be fun. But guess what? You don't want to identify with your fork either. You're not your fork. And that would be really weird if you thought that you were your fork. You're not. So you don't want to identify with your fork. Now, the same thing applies to your ego. Your ego is a very powerful tool. You don't want to destroy the ego, but you don't want to think that you are the ego. You don't want to identify with the ego. The ego is a very small portion of what you are and who you are. You are the higher self. You are the self with a capital S, or in the Neogenian system, what we call the inner star. The inner star is the true you, and it is the totality of your psyche in its entirety and the totality of you as a soul. The ego is just one function of that. It's a very important function, but it's not who you really are. You are the totality. You are the everything. You are a soul. You are a mind, what we call a zeta. You are the totality of your psyche and mind at large. So when we start to understand this, what do we need to do is we need to realize, well, what is our ego and what does it do, and who are we really? So let's understand this by taking a look at a few different structures. Okay, so let's talk about the persona and the ego. And we're going to do this because most people are familiar with what these things are, even if they haven't applied names to them. So what is persona? Persona is Latin for mask. The persona are the masks that we wear when we go into social situations. So, for example, you will have a different persona depending on if you're with friends or family or coworkers. You act a certain way with your friends, you act a different way with your family, and you act a different way with your coworkers. Now, there's nothing wrong with a persona. There's nothing wrong with these masks that we wear. They're very useful. For example, if let's say you're working at a retail job and a customer says something rude to you, and you tell that customer, "Fuck you, you asshole," you're probably going to get fired. So even though it sometimes sucks that we have to act certain ways that may be contrary to how we really feel, it is often helpful in a practical sense. So it's a good thing that we have personas. But what we don't want to do is identify with our personas. We don't want to think that that's what we actually are. We want to realize, okay, I'm going to work now. I have to, do this. And I'm not saying that I'm not saying it's good that we live in a society that makes you have to do that. That sucks. But what I'm saying is, I'm sure you can understand that there are certain ways that you are with friends, certain ways you are with family, certain ways you are with your partner, certain ways that you are with coworkers. That's all slightly different. These are the masks that we wear. These are the personas that we take on. They're not negative. They're not bad, but they can be if we identify with them. We don't want to identify. It's not who we are. It's an aspect of ourselves. It's a filtered version of ourselves, a mitigated version of ourselves that we present. And so what the persona does is it allows us to interact in the social world. That is the function of the persona, to interact in the social world. Our ego, so the ego wears the mask of the persona. The ego is who we are when we're at home and no one's watching. When we're at home and no one's watching and we can just be ourselves, like, oh, I'm just going to be myself. No one's watching. I don't have to impress anyone. I just do whatever I want. I'm just going to be me. That is, in a nutshell, the ego, what the ego is. However, that's not, and so most people know that they're not their personas, but some people don't. Some people get so attached to their personas that they identify with their personas and they think that's who they are. So they haven't even identified with their egos. They've identified with their personas. But you don't want to do that. But most people, the majority of people identify with their ego self. Because that's how I'm at home alone. That's me. That's who I am. I'm being myself, right? Well, that's not actually true. So as the persona is to the ego is to the self, to the higher self, to the true you. And so the true you, the higher self, which is what you actually are, uses the ego as a tool to interact in consciousness. So the ego, what is the ego? It's the center of your field of consciousness. It's the organizing principle of consciousness. Whereas the self, the higher self, is the organizing principle of the unconscious. The ego is the organizing principle of consciousness. So you can think of it's almost like a Russian doll, where the true you is the ego. I'm sorry, the true you is the self, the higher self, the inner star, who kind of wears the mask of the ego, that kind of wears the mask of the persona. Your higher self is the totality, it's who you are. The inner star, it's who you truly are. The ego is the function of your mind that allows you to interact in consciousness, to navigate consciousness. The persona is what allows you to navigate the social world. Your body is what allows you to engage in the physical world. You see how all these different aspects have a certain function, but they're not the true you. The true you is the self, the higher self, the inner star. That's the true you. Is the body the true you? No. But is your higher self going to be able to interact in the physical world without a body? No. So you don't want to, let's say, destroy your body. Of course not. But you don't want to identify with your body. Your ego. Your ego is what allows you to organize and be centered in your field of conscious self-awareness. You don't want to destroy that, but you don't want to identify with it. Just like if you destroyed the body, you wouldn't be able to interact in the physical world. If you destroyed the ego, you would have no sense of self. You would have no sense of I. You would degrade to like an animalistic instinct. You would be driven by instinct. You would be driven by instinct if you were to destroy your ego. And then the persona, of course, allows you to interact in social situations. So these are all different aspects of you. Persona for social, ego for consciousness, body for physical. It's not what you really are. You are the self, which is the totality of your psyche, the totality of your mind, the totality of who you truly are. So what we need to do is understand what needs to happen. So first of all, we have to realize that so the ego is everything that we believe about our, my name is Joanna, and I'm 26 years old and am going to college to be a doctor and have a sister named Annabelle or something. It's these associations that we've built around ourselves. So the ego is a complex built around the core of the self. So all your experiences in this particular lifetime sort of aggregate around your core, kind of like a constellation. And these elements are who you usually believe who you really are. But that's not who you are. Your mind is extremely expansive. You have a whole unconscious field, all this untapped potential, all this untapped energy, and you've lived countless lives and countless incarnations. This is just a tiny little sliver, a tiny little slice, a tiny little piece of who you are. It's not the whole you, it's not the true you. So going through calcination is about identifying all the aspects of yourself that are limiting. Because remember, you can create yourself into whatever you so will. And since the ego is not who you really are, it's a structure that has evolved, a conceptual structure, a complex that has evolved. What you want to do is get rid of all the faulty systems that hold you back. All your fears, all your doubts, all your limitations, all your false beliefs. Society telling you you can't be a certain way. You're not good enough. Oh, you shouldn't dress like that. Oh, you shouldn't look like that. Oh, that's not how a man behaves, or that's not how a woman behaves, or non-binary, that's not even a thing. You're crazy. All that is bullshit. These are structures that a society and a culture has imposed upon you, and people begin to integrate and believe them and think of them as being true, when they're just a Saturnian rule set that can be destroyed in place of a new system that is much more powerful and will lead to your growth and transformation. So the first part of calcination is about no longer identifying with your ego self. Not destroying it, but realizing it's just a particular tool. Just like you don't want to identify with your body, just like you don't want to identify with your persona, you don't want to identify with your ego. So it's about breaking free from that identity by realizing that's not you, and then going through all of the limitations that are holding you back. You can think about maybe doubts or beliefs or fears that you have, things that hold you back, things that are limiting to you, perhaps coming from religion. Oh, you're not allowed to behave that way. That's a sin. Or your family, don't act like that. That's shameful. Or your friends, oh man, you look like an idiot. What are you doing crying and showing emotion? Or culture, society, it just goes on and on and on. It's about realizing all of these things are holding you back and limiting you from being your true self and who you are really meant to be and become. That is the inner star. And so, by the way, my first book, Neogenesis, is all about, it's called Dawn of the New Mind, because my first book, Neogenesis, is all about destroying old belief systems, because you've basically been brainwashed since you've been born. You've been brainwashed. So that's what my first book is about. It's about, it's very much related to the calcination step. Now, my first book is more associated with destroying faulty belief systems, like the way that you understand reality. Like, reality is physical. No, it's not. Or, reality is created by a god. No, it's not. Oh, reality is, X, Y. It's about destroying your old reality tunnel so you can create a new one. I don't discuss so much about destroying like limiting beliefs in terms of like maybe like fears and doubts and stuff like that. But that is very important. So you kind of have these, they all go hand in hand. It's anything that has been imposed upon you that holds you back, whether that is an understanding of what reality is, scientific materialism telling you, oh, reality is matter and that's it. Or religion telling you, oh, well, it was created by God. God is real. Or if it has to do with impositions about who you are. Oh, you're a girl, you need to act a certain way. Or you're not smart enough, you could never do that. Or don't look like that, that's weird. Be yourself, but not like that. Society always likes to tell you to be yourself, as long as you're not too much yourself. As long as you don't go too much against the grain. And that's why a lot of we'll talk about the shadow self later. We'll begin talking about that in step 2, which is dissolution, where you begin to go into your unconscious and realizing that there's a lot there that's been repressed, because all the aspects of you that have been denied get pushed to the shadow. But that's not part of calcination. That's the next 2 steps, dissolution and separation, where we'll get into the shadow. This is about destroying the limiting systems and the identification with your ego, so that you understand that you're more than that, and then will be free to create your true self. And that's where exploring your unconscious mind comes in. That's where exploring your shadow self comes in. So what I want to talk about here as well is this idea of, so the ego represents the center of your field of consciousness. Like I said, it's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. Having a strong, healthy ego is important. It's what allows you to make healthy decisions, plan for the future. And guess what? Empathy. Having a strong and healthy ego is extremely important for empathy, because you can understand what it is like to be someone else by placing yourself in someone else's shoes. That's a process of consciousness. And if you weren't conscious, you wouldn't be able to do that. But you don't want to identify with your ego. That's the key difference. That's the key thing. So the ego should be thought of as the servant to your higher self. Okay. The ego is the servant to your higher self. You don't want to get rid of it, but you want to look at the ego as being in service to your higher self. Just like your body is in service to yourself. You don't want your body calling the shots, right? You don't want to think that you're your body. I mean, your body is the vehicle. You are the controller of the body. And you wouldn't want your persona making all the decisions, right? You might not like who you are or have to be sometimes in certain scenarios. You wouldn't want to be that all the time. And so likewise, but I mean, you don't want to destroy your personas. You don't want to destroy. I mean, sometimes it's necessary to tweak personas, because we live in such a fucked up world that makes us, think we have to be certain ways when we don't. There are times when we need to take off our masks and be like, this is ridiculous. Fuck you. I don't need to act this way. But like I said, if you're practically speaking, if you have a job, you don't want to be telling everyone to fuck off, or you're not going to have a job very long. It sucks we live in a world like that, but we do, and it helps us get along. So you don't want these aspects of you calling the shots. So likewise, the ego, you don't want to get rid of the ego. The ego, but should be thought of as the servant to the true you. Because remember, a lot of people get so hung up on their ego identity that they almost think of it like, oh, well, being the servant to your higher self means like, oh, I have to be a servant? No, you're the higher self. It's about flipping the roles. So when you first start getting into this, right? Because we talk a lot about the inner star and making a connection to your inner star, which is the inner star in the Neogenian system is what we call the higher self. So the inner star, the higher self, they're the same thing. So a lot of people have this idea when they first get started, almost like this perspective of they are looking up at their higher self, not literally, but in, like an imaginative, symbolic way, or just like a feeling like, oh, I'm looking up at I'm down here and my higher self is up there, metaphorically speaking. But really, it's not like that. And when you start to make a very, very strong connection to your higher self, well, you realize that is what you are, and the perception shifts. So now you're the higher self looking down on the ego. And it's almost like playing a video game where, like The Sims or something, where you are looking at the character and moving the character. You have that top-down sort of view where you realize you are the one that's in control. The true you, the eternal you, the divine you, the powerful you. And the ego, there's nothing wrong with it, but it lets you play the game of life. Just like if you couldn't play Sims without your Sim character. That Sim character is what allows you to play the game. Your body, your ego, your persona is what allows you to interact and play in this game of life. And the more that you connect with your higher self, the more you start to realize, hey, this is a game. I can be what I want. I can do what I want. I can transform. I can manifest what I want. I can create what I want. And so, what we need to do is realize that the ego is the means by which your higher self or inner star manifests in the waking world. It's the doorway to which it's able to enter into this world. And when I mean enter into this world, I mean when you become conscious of yourself as the higher self. These are higher levels of consciousness, by the way. Do you see how some people identify with their persona? Other people identify with their ego. Other people identify with their higher self. Someone who identifies with their persona will be at a lower state of consciousness than someone who identifies with their ego, who will be at a lower stage of consciousness from someone who identifies with their higher self. And so people seem to think of like different levels of consciousness as always being like, ooh, this mythological thing. No, it's very practical, and people are at very, very different, varying degrees of levels of consciousness. And this system of alchemy is about raising your levels of consciousness higher and higher and higher. And in the Neogenian system, we get even beyond that to hyper awareness and all awareness, where you start to get to even higher levels of understanding. But I digress. The point is that you need to look at the ego as being not who you are, not identifying with it, but being in service to your higher self, the servant of the higher self. This is known as different things. So I really so like in Thelema, they call your higher self the holy guardian angel. Your higher self is called the holy guardian angel in Thelema. And so in Thelema, it's about becoming the prophet of the holy guardian angel. And so in that sense, it's almost like you're creating your own religion where you are your own God and your own prophet at the same time. Your ego is like the prophet of you as a God. It's sort of that prophet-God relationship to servant, higher self, inner star relationship. If you don't like that, that's fine. If it feels too religious to you, you don't have to think of it that way. I don't really think of it that way. I prefer to think of in terms of being the inner star, and the ego as being a gateway towards expression in the material world. That's the way that I think of it, and I engage with it. But I'm just letting you know different ways that it's been expressed in different systems. So Dennis Hauck wrote a book on alchemy, and he describes the step of calcination as overthrowing the tyrant king. Overthrowing the tyrant king. And so what's the tyrant king? The tyrant king is the ego. The tyrant king is, I'm king of the castle. I command everyone. I'm the best. I'm the greatest. And it's about overthrowing the tyrant king by making it realize that the king should actually be the servant. The king is necessary for like this order and interacting, but the true king or ruler or whatever term you want to use is you as the higher self. And so that ego that thinks it's the king needs to be overthrown so that the true self can take the throne and the ego isn't destroyed or killed or dismissed. It's just has its proper place. And so this is very, very similar to the Demiurgos of Gnosticism, the Demiurge. So the Demiurge in Gnosticism is associated, and the reason why I'm talking about that is because we talk about Saturn, right? It's associated with Saturn. Saturn is also often associated with the devil. And the Demiurge in Gnosticism is often associated with the devil. So these are all very, very similar concepts. So the Demiurge or the devil is, there's different ways to interpret it. It's usually either interpreted as the shadow self or the ego. Now, it's very powerful to associate it with the ego. Why? Because remember in Gnosticism, Demiurge is associated with the God of the Bible. So yes, Gnostics look, if you're not familiar with Gnosticism, Gnostics are a group of heretical Christians that basically believed that the God of the Old Testament was an evil satanic being called the Demiurge. He had a bunch of different names, Yaldabaoth, Samael, Saklas, Nibruel. But anyways, what is this being, this Demiurge? It's an ignorant being in that it thinks that it is the one true God. It believes that it is God when it's not. In Gnosticism, you have the one and the pleroma. You have the pleroma, the realm of divine light, and the one. So in terms of Gnosticism, the one would represent the higher self, and the Demiurge would represent the ego. And when you have the false identification with the ego, that's the Demiurge saying, oh, I am God and there is no God but me. The God of the Bible says all the time, I am God and there is no God but me. I am God and there is no other. I am God, you shall serve only me, blah, blah, blah. But is that true? No, the higher self is the true, just like the ego goes, I am the true self. I am the only self. I'm the real self. That's what the ego likes to think, but it's not. You as the higher self, as the inner star, in terms of Gnosticism, the one is the true you. And so when we get down to it, though, we need to realize that the Demiurge isn't necessarily evil in itself. Well, in Gnosticism, it was pretty much considered evil. But in terms of our symbolic understanding of it, the Demiurge just means creator. The Demiurge is the creator. And so the Demiurge is the one that's able to structure the material world. So basically, if the Demiurge is to realize that it is not the highest, that there is a higher one than it, then it becomes useful. In certain forms of Gnosticism, the Demiurge is actually looked at as a useful structure. I believe it's Valentinian Gnosticism, the Logos, which is an emanation of the Divine One, looks at the Demiurge as being very useful for creating structure and order in the material world. It just gets out of control when the Demiurge starts to think that he is the only God. And in Gnosticism, a voice actually comes down from the pleroma and says, don't lie, when he says, I'm the only God, a big booming, don't lie. And it's actually his mother, Sophia. Sophia is the one who gave rise to the Demiurge. So yeah, he was very naughty. His mom had to call him out. So what we need to be able to do is understand that we need to order and structure our psyche in such a way that we are destroying not our ego, but the identification with the ego and all limiting thought structures that have been built up all through our lives, that Saturnian influence. So that Saturnian influence is what needs to be destroyed. And so we need to let go of things that don't serve us. Things like letting go, like I've said before, this is something that you have to do a lot of self-reflection. It can be like letting go of the need to be perfect, breaking through the fear of failure or judgment, dissolving narratives like, oh, I'm not good enough. You can just go on and on and on. All these things that limit you. It, like I said, it can be something as foundational as I believe reality is material when it's not. That's just what you've been told, and you've integrated that. To as far as ego beliefs about you in terms of your ego. Like I said, like, oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, I'm not smart enough. I'm afraid of this. I'm a failure. I'm worthless. I need to act a certain way. This is how men should act. This is how women should act. Or this is how a good person acts. This is how a good Christian acts. This is how, this is the amount of money I need to make, or this is the, I won't feel happy until this and this occurs, whatever. It's about destroying all these limiting thought structures. But before we get too into that, and this can be like a lot, the need to impress others, or the need to, all these things that can potentially be holding you back. But what I wanted to mention as well is that, so when we're looking here at, the Saturnian influence, which represents rigid structure, with the element of lead, that is a very dense metal, resistant to change. This is the process of transformation of calcination. We use the element of fire, which is about transforming this. We're going to be transforming these with the element of fire. But one thing that I wanted to mention is that we can also bring tarot into this, because we can make an association with tarot here, and an association with tarot in terms of the process of calcination would be the devil, because the devil, like I said, can sometimes stands for the shadow, but can also stand for the ego. And you see, the ego, this is the devil, the Demiurge, who guess what, is keeping you chained and locked up in that rigid, limiting structure. These chains are limiting beliefs, limiting structures, limiting systems. And ultimately, you'll see there's male and female here. Later on, when we get down to the subject of conjunction and combining opposites, you'll see that it can keep you from your inner partner, your inner mirror self as well. So whereas this is an excellent connection to make with regard to the step of calcination. The devil is also, there's a lot of fire imagery associated with this as well. There's a lot of fire, a lot of flames. It's the devil, it's the ego, it's the one who keeps you chained, the one who keeps you locked up. So this is all about overcoming this so that you can be able to have the power to shape yourself and create yourself into whatever you so will. Okay, so how do you actually go about doing this? Well, it's not an easy process. Like I said, there's getting rid of all limiting beliefs in general. I go through meticulous detail in my book, Neogenesis. But when it comes to other types of limiting beliefs, more like limiting beliefs to do with beliefs about yourself, like, oh, I'm not good enough, or I'm not creative enough, or, oh, I need to act like this. This is going to take a lot of inner reflection and, perhaps getting pen and paper and making a list of these different limiting beliefs that you have about yourself, things that hold you back, and realizing that those are not true. You could do a ritual with this if you wanted to. You could write down all the different limiting beliefs that you have about yourself, and then burn it. Of course, do it safely, of course, but burn it, release it, destroy it by, engaging in that symbolic act of calcination. Now, of course, is that going to mean automatically that, oh, you're all free from that now? No. But when you do stuff like this, you're telling your psyche symbolically. This is why we work with these with symbolism like this, right? This is why we have fire being lit. This is why, because we can understand on a conscious level, oh, I need to identify the parts of myself that are limiting so I can destroy them and remove them and be free. We can understand that consciously. But when we work with these symbols, it's communicating to our unconscious that that's what we're doing. And do you see the difference here? There's a conscious, analytic, rational understanding of it. And then by using these symbols or engaging in ritual, we're communicating that with our unconscious. So we have both working hand in hand together. So if you, for example, just do a ritual or work with symbolic images, is that going to do a lot? It will probably help, but ultimately you have to actually make conscious effort. Now, if you make conscious effort and don't use the symbolism, that will also probably help, but it is so much more powerful when you have both working together, where you have your unconscious beginning to resonate and realize the process that you're going through, so starts to help you out in the background, nudging you towards things that will allow, because now you're telling your unconscious, this is what we're doing, this is the process, this is happening, and this is what's important. And so your unconscious will begin to work in the background to help you with that, while consciously you're doing the analyzing, you're doing the deconstructing, you're going through the process. And so you have both working hand in hand together. And I want to mention this because most people do one or the other. And this is where we get into we haven't talked about the mirror self yet, but you might have very like left brain associated people who are, well, I'm just going to do strict analyzing. What does all this symbolism and rituals have to, that's stupid. I don't need any of that. And then they just do the conscious part. And then you have people who are more right-brained associated, intuitive types who are like, oh, I don't really want to do the strict analysis. I just want to do the rituals and do the meditations. And it's really, either of these aren't going to be useless. If you do one or the other, it's going to be helpful to a certain degree, but it's going to be so much more powerful when you have both working together in harmony. It's like when you have the right brain and the left brain working together, or you use your right foot and your left foot to walk forward. You know, all these people who are like, oh no, it's like, you know, either right brain or left brain, right? It's analysis. No, reason and analysis is wrong. It's about mystical revelation. No, mystical revelation is crazy. That's a bunch of woo-woo. You have all the, you know, the right brain, left brain people fighting with each other, left-hand path versus right-hand path, all this division, all this, like, no, this is the way to go. Really, it's about synthesizing all this stuff together to be the most powerful and whole. That's what individuation is all about. We call it inner star actualization. Jung called it individuation. Individuation is related to becoming an individual, but it's also related to being indivisible, in that you are undivided. You aren't divided against yourself. Your unconscious and conscious are working together, not opposed to one another. Your right brain and left brain associated functions are in harmony as you explore both aspects. So I just really want to make that point very, very clear, because I know there's a ton of people who are going to come to my channel and think only one or the other is important. Some people are just, oh, I just want to do the rituals and meditation. And other people who are just like, oh, I just want to do rational analysis. Either paths will help to some degree, but it's infinitely more powerful when you do both. Like, it's a lot easier to make progress walking if you're using your right foot and your left foot. Can you make progress just using your left foot? Yeah, but you're probably not going to be able to win very many races doing that. You're not going to get, you know, it's going to be a lot harder for you. And this is going to be what really makes the process extremely powerful. Now, so as far as meditation goes, right? Like, I'll give you a simple example of something that you can do. This is a really, really simple one. I already gave you like a quick ritual you could do by writing down different limiting aspects that you believe about yourself or that you perhaps have identified with, and then burning it. Of course, always making sure you're safe when you burn something. You know, don't do anything dumb. Obviously, I shouldn't need to tell you that, but be careful with fire. Fire is dangerous. So that, you know, that's a simple ritual. But you can also do a meditation as well. And so these meditations are different than what you may be used to. So in typical meditation is passive. You just sort of shut your eyes, close your eyes, and let whatever comes up come up. And that's very powerful sometimes. That can be very powerful, but that's not what we're doing here. In alchemical meditation, what you're doing is not just clearing your mind, but rather you're filling your mind with archetypal imagery. That's what you do when you look at all these symbols, right? When you look at these symbols, you are filling your mind with archetypal imagery that resonates with your unconscious. You know, the devil represents something, Saturn represents something, lead represents something, fire represents something, combining all this stuff together into a certain language that's communicating things with your unconscious mind. So an alchemical meditation isn't about clearing your mind, it's about filling your mind with archetypal imagery that's going to resonate with your unconscious. Now, so for example, I mean, you still need to start by clearing your mind. So just as a quick example, what you can do is I would recommend lighting a candle, so you have that element there. As always, if you're using fire, make sure you're careful, especially if you're not going to be, your eyes are closed. Don't burn anything down. Okay, be safe. Anyway, but you can light a fire. Not light a fire. Don't light a fire. Light a candle. Or anything. You use anything that could represent fire to you as well. If you're not comfortable with that, just anything that represents fire to you. Just have that around. And then close your eyes, sit and close your eyes. And then you're just going to get into a state like you would with meditation. Deep breath in, hold for a moment, slow breath out, and do that 4 times, 4-fold breath in and out. Just relax, clear your mind. Then what you're going to want to do is imagine a fire in front of you. And this fire is very powerful, but it's not threatening. It's just a very powerful fire. And this fire is going to represent transformation. If you want, you can even imagine the alchemical symbol of fire within it, the upwards triangle within the fire. And then you're going to picture yourself, from the first person point of view, when you have that very clear in your mind, stepping directly into that fire, directly into that alchemical symbol as well. If you're imagining that as well, stepping directly into it. Now, this isn't, you're going to feel its warmth and you're going to feel its power, but it's not painful. This isn't about a painful fire. This is about a transformative fire. So what you're going to want to do is, while you're in this fire, visualize this fire burning away all your false beliefs, fears, anything that weighs you down, anything that prevents you from being your true self, all your false beliefs, all your false structures. And how you're going to imagine that is you're going to imagine that as everything that's not you as dark smoke leaving your body. So you're going to see smoke rising up, and all that smoke, that dark smoke that's rising up, is going to represent all those false beliefs, limitations, identifications that aren't the true you being burned away. And so you're going to do that until you feel comfortable doing so, until you feel like you have done it long enough. And then you're going to just close it by breathing in and out 4 times like you started, except this time, when you breathe in, you're going to imagine light filling your body. And when you breathe out, you're going to imagine blowing out black smoke. And you're going to do that 4 times. Light in, smoke out, light in, smoke out, light in, smoke out, light in, smoke out, till you've gotten rid of all the smoke and you are a body of light. And then you can step out of the fire and open your eyes and be complete with that meditation. Now, that's a very, very simple one, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be complex. But as you can see, what you're doing with this is you're filling your mind with archetypal imagery that is communicating to your unconscious the process that you are going through. And by doing meditations like that, by doing a ritual like that, you can begin like a ritual, like I've mentioned earlier, with perhaps writing things down on a piece of paper. You can begin to make that communication to your unconscious, the process that you are going through. Now, do you want to stop there? No. You also want to engage in rational analysis of all this. You want to be able to actually begin to analyze, well, what are the limiting beliefs that I have? How can I start to, what steps do I need to take so that I'm no longer identifying with this? How do I need to reframe my perspective so I realize that such and such is not true? And later on, we're going to talk about then how to construct the new you, construct the true you by integrating the aspects of your unconscious. But this is the process that has to happen first. You have to get rid of that cage. You have to get rid of those limiting beliefs. You have to get rid of all those false structures so that you can destroy the old, to be able to create way for the new, to be able to create way for transformation in connecting with your inner star. So this is the first step in making that connection with your inner star, because the first step is getting rid of the barrier. The barrier is your ego identification, because if you're identifying with the ego, you're not identifying with the inner star. So this is the first step in that you're breaking that barrier, but you're not destroying the ego. You're just destroying the identification, because ultimately the ego is going to serve as the servant to your higher self. It's a function, it's a tool, and it's an important one. So always keep that in mind. This is the first step of alchemy, where you have that state of lead, but ultimately what's that lead going to become? It's going to become gold. So within that lead has the potential to become gold, but right now it's in that very rigid, confining structure that needs to have the heat of calcination applied to it so that it can be transformed from that Saturnian influence so that we can move to the next step. And the next step will be the step of dissolution, which is associated with Jupiter and tin and water. That'll be the next step. We sort of set ourselves on fire, metaphorically speaking. Now we're going to jump into the waters to cool the fire and dive deep into the unconscious. Because now that we know what we aren't, and we aren't identifying with what we aren't anymore, we're going to dive deep into the dark waters of the unconscious to begin to discover who we really are, what elements have been repressed, what elements are in our psyche that we haven't discovered. Where are our shadow selves, our mirror selves, our power selves, all these aspects of ourselves that will ultimately allow us to the final goal of connecting to our inner star and manifesting our will into reality. Because it doesn't end with just connecting to your inner star. If you just connected to your inner star, you'd be in the clouds all day. You need to manifest that into reality, into existence, so that you can be living the kind of life and a fulfilling and purposeful life that you want to live. So that's the first step of calcination. I'm going to put all of this. I know that that's probably it's kind of a lot of information to take in. I'm going to put all of it in a PDF download, notes for you guys. Anyone who's a member will have access to that. There are 5 other PDFs as well. I think this will be the 6th PDF. So make sure you check that out. Become a member if you aren't. It helps out a lot. I really appreciate it. And you get these very helpful tools. Check out all the links in the description. Like I said, I highly recommend if you're interested in what we're talking about today, go with psychogenesis. If you want an even deeper dive on like deconstructing old belief systems, Neogenesis is all about deconstructing old belief systems. Okay. So these books go very, very well. This is very much associated with calcination, and this is going to have everything else in it as well. Not in terms of alchemy, though. I always want to point that out so people don't get confused. Everything in the Neogenian series, this particular book series, is put in terms of rational, logical, analytical, psychological terms, not the symbolism or the rituals. So the rational analysis element is very much in all these. Okay, so make sure you check all that out. Links are in the description of this video. There's also my Spotify. You can follow me there, as well as a link to like some occult items and stuff if you want to, have some symbols to play with, etc., that are fun. And I hope you enjoyed it, my friend. We will keep this up next week on Monday, starting with or continuing with the second step, which is dissolution, and moving on from there. I hope you enjoyed this, my friends. As always, make sure you hit like and subscribe. And I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports, especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, DB, Nuselina, Dallas, Digital, David, LaDonna, Grace, Kira, Val, and everyone else. Thank you very much.